work to feed them. And he was industrious. He took a job in a government department, and government pays less at certain level than the private sector. And he was earning $3,000. He worked hard. He was an excellent worker in that department. This week I learned that he was going in the private sector, where he will earn near $8,000. To God we give the glory for him. But it is for me that he was prepared to take what was reasonably available at the time and to wait until something better comes to him. Some people at home looking for the perfect job. When I left school, I thought with my accounting skills that I should go and work in a bank, and I applied to every bank. Up to now, I still waiting. I had several interviews, including interview at the Central Bank. And they tell you the nice things, perhaps they tell every person who make it to the interview. You will hear from us in due course. And when I had almost given up, I looked over on the Bay Road and I saw the Social Security building. I said, what is that place? This building looked nice. So I would apply to it. And I applied. I was interviewed. And at the end of the interview, Robert Manning, God bless his soul, said to me, you have done very well. I'm going to recommend you to the board. I shouldn't see a problem. I don't see a problem. And so you will hear from us in a couple weeks. If all goes well, and he remembered to say if at the board. So if all didn't go well, I couldn't blame Mr. Manning. He said if all went well. And I got a job at Social Security. My preference was the bank, but I will tell you, I don't know what banking experience is. Never got a chance to work in the bank. I could say maybe it is part of divinity that now I am part of the Monetary Council of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, which has regulatory powers for the bank. But I went to Social Security and had one of the best working experience, working with people like Miss Yearwood, now of blessed memory, in records, working with Ernest Amory, then in charge of the lower floor, could still see where he sat, working with Cephalin Mills, the director, having moved into the accounting department. And the rest of this is history. My message to young people, there is not a perfect job, but there is a perfect opportunity to work. All the adults and parents who have children home, who don't want that job, who don't want to make a start, I'm appealing to you, encourage them to do something. No matter how small, no matter how lowly, honest work is good work and ought to be encouraged. If they were to wait for the perfect job, like I waited long to be in the bank, they may remain in your house for a very long while. I say to adults who are concerned about jobs and appointment, but your child is young. In the course of a lifetime, people are expected to change jobs many times, and there is research on that. So if your child, you want them to go to study in a year or two, why are you so fussy then about them getting a perfect job now? They should be just getting work experience, because they are not going to be staying there for any length of time. And so I'm calling for new attitudinal disposition towards work and life, where we are more positive and we are more thankful for opportunities. I think in this particular note, I would want to pause and to take questions from the media. And let me, while the media is getting ready, say thank you to the Cabinet colleagues and to recognize formally our Deputy Prime Minister, our Minister of Environment, our Minister of Human Settlement, our Attorney General, our Minister of Labor, our Minister of Health, and Excellencies of the Diplomatic Corps, Ambassador Powell, Ambassador Osborne, and the senior functionaries of the government, and all, of course, who are here today. Thank you for coming.
Good morning. Happy New Year.
Good morning.
Devon Cornelius, WinFM. Just a few questions. The anniversary of the Buckleys uprising was recently celebrated by the Nyabingi Theocracy Order, where they called for the erection of a monument to recognize the significance of the uprising. How important is national acknowledgement of this historical moment, and are there plans to erect a monument that recognizes its importance? And two, what is the status of the investigation involving Tourism Minister Lindsey Grant and police officers? Explain in detail what exactly is the police investigating, as questions are raised about the reason for wanting to stop the operations at the night spot. Thank you.
Good morning, Mevan Thompson, ZIZ. Can an update be given on the commissioning of the traffic lights at College Street and Bird Rock, the digitization of health records? When will the carnival closing ceremony be held? And finally, the residents of Taylors inquire about the remedying of the drainage system there to eradicate the unpleasant smell. Can an update or response be given to that, please?
Could you repeat the last one?
Taylors of residents, residents of Taylors, they inquire about remedying the drainage system to eradicate the unpleasant smell.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, Roshan Dixon, St. Kitts News Observer. With plans of moving past the shadows of the COVID-19 pandemic, as you said this morning, and countries now relaxing COVID-19 protocols, when will we see similar relaxations here in St. Kitts and Nevis to make this an endemic, as being reported? And also, what plans are in place to fortify the health system and protect it in the future from being overwhelmed? And what is the future of mask mandates and vaccine requirements?
Good morning, Glenn Mack, SKN Newsline. Mr. Prime Minister, on the matter of the good governance agenda that we spoke about even since last year, could you, in two specific areas, that is the Integrity in Public Life Act and the Freedom of Information Act, provide some detailed update as to what really is happening for the implementation of these two acts? Additionally, please clarify if, in the situation of the Integrity in Public Life Act, whether or not high-ranking members of the public service, but basically not civil servants, will have to disclose their assets annually and publicly. We have been informed that some persons who were terminated from employment for not taking the COVID-19 vaccine have not received severance payments. Could this matter be clarified? On the issue of electoral reform, how soon can the country begin to see substantial movement on matters related to campaign financing, the boundary situation, and overseas voters? And if the Minister of Human Settlement can explain for us the selection criteria for the allocation of houses to residents of St. Kitts. Thank you.
Good morning, Tian Coggins, Government Information. First question, would the relaxation of restrictions allow both unvaccinated and vaccinated persons at events? And secondly, would the relaxation of COVID-19 measures relate to the return of contact sports, specifically football? The third question would be, some sections of society have been reporting potholes under Old Road Bay Road. Can we say if any work will be done on that project? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we will pause here. We have some questions, well, at least one that had been put with respect to the criteria for the selection of persons for homes. The Minister of Human Settlements, of course, had been identified by the person posing that question. I'm not calling him at this point in time, just trying to get some order. There were a number of questions posed with respect to our good governance agenda. The Integrity in Public Life Act was identified. What was the second piece of legislation? Sorry, Freedom of Information and Freedom of Information Act. So that one will be addressed by the Attorney General. The issue of the Electoral Reform, Attorney General, take note. The AG will come up the appropriate time to address this. The non-payment of severance payment, the Minister of Labor will be able to address that. And those related to the physical infrastructure, we're talking potholes and Old Road Bay and drainage issues where pertinent. The Minister for Public Infrastructure is here and he will address those, including also the matter raised early, the commissioning of the street lights. The digitalization of the health records, we have our Minister of Health, so I will call on her appropriately to address that. The matter of the police investigation, Minister Grant, the Commissioner of Police, is here, and his ACP is here. The issue with respect to the Buckleys uprising and the erection of a monument is an important one, and I suspect in the context of our celebration in February, Black History Month, it is a critical part of the history of St. Kitts and Nevis. And we have set up a committee that has been headed by the member for St. Christopher III to deal with this particular matter and other matters with respect to the Buckleys uprising. And so I will say, not to preempt an answer, that it is a work in progress. In fact, one of the things that had been put before me for discussion was whether or not those who featured prominently in this uprising should not be honored and be acclaimed as national heroes of St. Kitts and Nevis. So it is a significant and weighty matter Of course, there is a process for persons to be so designated, and that will be put to the appropriate committee to do an evaluation. The Buckleys uprising way back in the 1930s was part of the struggle for economic and social justice in our country, where men and women were prepared, as it were, to don their cutlasses and machetes and other implements to make a stand for improvement in the quality of life. And as a result of this, the disturbances way back at this critical point in our colonial history, we had the Moyne Commission, which would come and would look at all of these things, investigate, and to make recommendations for the amelioration of life for the people, not just in St. Kitts and Nevis, but in the wider Caribbean region. The Buckleys riot was, as it were, the forerunner to other uprisings which will take place elsewhere in the Caribbean. And put together in that context has an important history that we ought not to disnotice. When we forget our history, we can easily allow circumstance of the present to, as it were, allow us to relive the ordeal of the past. So I put that context to say, yes, for me personally, this is an important part of the national tapestry of St. Kitts and Nevis, which we have to preserve, honor, and commemorate in ways that make sense, in ways that add to national pride, national cohesion, and national memory. Memory of the struggles of those who went before us. Memory of the causes that are still of great relevance today. The bread and butter issues for so many people impacted by the Buckleys rising, and the expression of the needs for workers' rights to become an enhanced part of how we do things in St. Kitts and Nevis. The evolution of the labor movement in the Caribbean had all been about issues of social and economic justice, and the Buckleys uprising fits well into that regional endeavor for people's empowerment, which still remains an important thrust for us in St. Kitts and Nevis at this particular moment in time. When the member for number 3, our Minister of Health, comes to address the health matters, I would ask her to say something in terms of some of the work that has been put forward, and to ask that at least for our upcoming cabinets, we can put this matter more firmly on the national agenda for government action by having the recommendations or at least an update on the work of the committee. I should say in this matter, our Governor General has a great interest, and I myself have had several meetings with him and several ideas that have come forward. But we have put a structure in place, and I think it is time for us to have a formal report so that we can concretize the actions that we will take in this regard. I will ask the Commissioner of Police if he would come forward and address the matter that has been put with respect to the police investigation. And he will then be followed by the Attorney General and the good governance agenda. We have Minister Hamilton, who will come on the criteria, and then we will have the Minister of Public Infrastructure, and he will be followed by the Minister of Health and the Minister of Labor. Thanks.
Good morning to all. the question posed by my good friend Mr. Cornelius, that the police force is responsible to maintain law and order in the Federation. And as you are aware, we're in a pandemic, and there's the COVID-19 Act that the police has asked to enforce. So as a result, officers were assigned to check on business premises to see that they are complying with the Act and the protocols. On the 8th of January, 3 officers visited the last lap bar. As a result, an incident occurred. Police has investigated this matter, and the file has been submitted to the Director of Public Prosecution, who is the competent authority for these matters.
Thank you. We'll hear from the Attorney General.
Good morning to everybody. SK Newsline has asked us to give an update on the good governance agenda, and in particular to reference questions of the integrity in public life and the freedom of information. As far as these two items in terms of the good governance agenda, one would say that they have been passed into law. And in terms of the integrity in public life, this has been significantly advanced. Quite recently, we would have had a report from the chairperson of the commission. I should state first that the commission has been established with the chairperson in the person of the former or retired Justice of the High Court, Justice Pauletta Lance. She also has, as members on the commission with her, Mr. Dennis Freddie Knight and Mrs. Carolyn Boddy. They form the commission. There is a chief executive officer who is in place in the person of the former Director of Audit, Mr. Bertie Albert Edwards, and they have now established a permanent office on Liverpool Row upstairs of Daly Walwyn. They have been working assiduously over the past months to get the system ready. They have submitted 2 reports so far on their work, not only in the activities that they've done, but also in reporting on the financial situation of the Commission, as monies have been appropriated and have been assigned to them. These reports, by law, are expected to be tabled in the Parliament so that everyone will be able to see the work of the Commission. At this point in time, the Commission is trying to streamline, as we move forward, a number of the regulations that are required to have those who should submit declarations to the Commission do so. I think that the question raised the point that not just public servants, but others, and I suspect them in parliamentarians, ministers of government, and others, will all be expected to submit declarations of their assets every year. These, of course, will be done so, covered by questions of privacy. They're not public documents per se, but they are expected to be maintained by the Commission. And if there are any untoward, significant departures in terms of the declaration submitted, the Commission would be required to do further investigation. We have heard from the Commission that at current legislation, some 1,400 individuals would have had to be covered. And one of the things that they're working on is to see how this number can be reduced significantly on the 1,400 to be able to make it more effective. Those who would not be covered by this act would also be covered by other forms of legislation. But as I said, the reports that have been submitted by the Commission, the Chairman of the Commission, the Chairperson, Madam Justice Pauletta Lance, would be required to be filed in Parliament shortly. One further thing I will say on this point, and that is the Commission is waiting on a date, an order which would require all those who are required to do so to submit their declarations to the Commission, and that this date would be published on their website and for everyone to be aware that this has happened. The question, as I understand it, also spoke to the Freedom of Information Act. What we have had is a number of information officers who are now being employed in various departments, and part of their remit would be to organize information in such a way that any requests for information would fall within a certain set of protocols. There are certain time frames that are required by law, and this still has to be operationalized fully, but work is ongoing in terms of freedom of information. I think the question also then went on to ask about questions of electoral reform, and specifically mentioned the boundaries. I would have mentioned at the debate in December, the budget debate in terms of appropriations, that we have in place a new chairman of the Boundaries Commission, as mandated by the Constitution. Sections 49 and Section 50 of the Constitution of St. Kitts and Nevis establishes how this Boundaries Commission is established. The Governor General appoints a commission, a chairman of the commission, having had advice from the Honorable Prime Minister and with consultation with the Leader of the Opposition. He has appointed Mr. James Buchanan, licensed land surveyor, to be the chairman of the St. Kitts and Nevis Boundaries Commission. The Prime Minister would have nominated 2 members of his benches, on the benches, the government benches, to be a part of that commission as well. And the Honorable Sean Richards, Deputy Prime Minister, and the Honorable Akila Byron Nisbet have been appointed to be a part of that Boundaries Commission. The Leader of the Opposition would have appointed 2 members to sit on that commission as well. And the Right Honorable Dr. Dennis Douglas has appointed himself, as well as the Honorable Mr. Dr. Jeffrey Nisbet, Jeffrey Hanley, I apologize, to be a part of that commission. So the commission has been constituted. It's an independent constitutional commission on which the chairman has the authority to establish schedules of meetings. I should point out that this commission has 2 mandates. One, to see if there is a need to do any changes to the current boundaries. First, in the terms of the numbers of individuals per constituency, or for that matter, to see if there's a need to increase the number of constituencies in St. Kitts and in Nevis. And this mandate is governed by a schedule of regulations to be found in the Constitution, that says that the constituencies in St. Kitts should be near equal in the number of inhabitants, not voters, but inhabitants, so that if you live in a particular constituency, the numbers on that representatives have responsibility for should be equal in number of inhabitants to those in another constituency in St. Kitts, and similarly for Nevis. And why there's a distinction is that the population of St. Kitts is larger than that in Nevis, so it does not mean near equal across the board. That distinction is important. And so that is something that has to be closely looked at. A second condition in terms of the Boundaries Commission would to be if there is to be an increase in the number of seats in St. Kitts and Nevis, that there must be, the numbers in Nevis must now reflect 1/3 of the numbers of constituencies of the overall number. Currently, you would be aware that in St. Kitts we have 8 constituencies, and in Nevis 3 constituencies. If there was to be an increase in the number of constituencies in St. Kitts, Nevis must have 1/3 of the total number. So if you wanted to put it up to 9, that's a quarter. If it went to 10 in St. Kitts, it now requires Nevis to have 2 more seats. So that is something that have to be aware of. But the Boundaries Commission is expected to meet shortly, and I'm sure the commissioners, the chairman and the commissioners would make the necessary announcements to the general public. Just to say that the commission is expected to produce a report which is submitted to His Excellency the Governor General, and based on that report, the Prime Minister should make a resolution which is submitted to the Parliament, which, if and when voted on in a positive manner, will create new boundaries in St. Kitts and Nevis. So that's the question of that. In terms of electoral reform, I'm pleased to say that over the last 3 to 4 weeks, I accepted a request by the Electoral Commission to meet with my office as the line ministry that gives support to the work of the Electoral Commission. Again, too, the Electoral Commission is an independent body set up by Constitution, and that Electoral Commission has as its chairman Mr. Nazibu Butler, as solicitor, attorney at law, Mr. Nazibu Butler is chairman, and on the advice of the Prime Minister, Mr. Joseph Liebert, former Assistant Commissioner of Police, acts on one side, and the Right Honorable Denzel Douglas, leader of the opposition, would have nominated Mr. Attorney at Law Jason Hamilton. So the Electoral Commission is comprised of Mr. Butler, Jason Hamilton, and Joseph Liebert, constitutionally, and their function is to supervise the supervisor of elections, whose remit is to ensure that there is a proper registration of voters in St. Kitts and Nevis, as well as in conducting the course of an election. In the meeting, the Commission has presented to me for onward submission to Cabinet and formally to the Parliament if necessary, a number of recommendations in terms of electoral reform. And the public will be hearing of these shortly, more and more. There are such things as having votes to be counted at polling stations. Currently, the practice is that once you vote, at the end of the polling day, they're then transported to a central location oftentimes causing a lot of delay, a lot of logistics in terms of security and so forth. But the recommendation, one recommendation is that presiding officers should do preliminary counts at the polling stations before transmitting them to the returning officer, who would then have the final say in submitting them to the supervisor of elections. And there are other recommendations that the Electoral Commission has made that needs to be properly ventilated, and these in time will be announced in more detail to the general public. I hope that is give some reassurance as to what that is being done. Thank you very much.
I want to thank the AG for answering that, but it's so fundamental an issue that as Prime Minister I have to add my voice to it and to say every commitment that we have made in the context of the good governance agenda, we will in fact fulfill, because it's critically important. And it is interesting that it is at this time that that matter comes back again for public discussion, because it was in January of 2015 that we saw how democracy and good governance had gone awry. Luckily, the country has not had to relive that. It was in January of 2015 that general elections were announced in ways which were later found to be illegal. In February, it was just days before we went to the polls that we know whether we were in bound constituency 7 or constituency 8. In an abnormality that expressed itself when we went to sign our names to formalize our candidacy on nomination day, the returning officer had 2 forms that you sign. One in case you end up in number 7, once in case you end up in number 8. That was the lived reality, and how far we have come to that. From that, under team unity government, where the institutions of democracy are in fact allowed to fulfill their significant mission and purpose. For 20 plus months, we could not bring a motion of no confidence in the government to Parliament. What have we done? We went to the Parliament being victims of that and passed a legislation mandated that a motion of no confidence must become by a specific date, I think 21 or so days after it was stable and ready to be presented. So we are doing things in relation to that agenda. And we have had one. And in 7 days, we brought it to the debate in the Parliament. So we have been practicing it. So sometimes it's easy for people to use these sexy phrases about good governance, not understanding and appreciating how far the country has come, and there is no crisis in the good governance agenda. Of course, we must always be reminded, and we accept that. We accept the need for good governance. That is why we pass the Public Accounts Act to ensure good governance. It in the context of St. Kitts and Nevis. And it was a major addition. And the former Prime Minister in Antigua, Baldwin Spencer, when interviewed at Think and Win or some public radio station, said he liked the St. Kitts and Nevis model. There were arguments in the debate about who should report to the Public Accounts Committee. The Public Accounts Committee is headed by the leader of the opposition. And the leader of the opposition has not called one meeting of the commission in over 7 years. Good governance agenda requires good people to do the work. And the leader of the opposition is found wanted. So when persons come to make certain queries, you want to understand, well, what is the concern? What is the concern? Because while some want to keep this alive as if something is awry, in a way that is pervasive in the governance, the international reports say differently. You go to the World Justice Rule of Law Index, we're on top. Just on the 12th of January, our ambassador in the UN sent me something entitled not UN, the OAS, Selected Performance Measures of Democracy for OAS member states on the control of corruption, political stability, voice and accountability. And on every head of these, St. Kitts and Nevis in the top 5 also. He went on to point out where we stand on a number of these matters with respect to the great United States of America. We are committed to the good governance agenda, and we are working it. Information Act, we operationalize it, we put somebody in place. The truth is, some of these things, frankly speaking, they require a lot more work that had been contemplated to make them effective. Who will provide the information? What security will be there? That is why we needed to have the Protection of Information Act to go as an accompanying bit of legislation to protect the people, to protect the people, and to protect information that ought to be held confidential. So they don't wake up one morning and say they want to get this and that of somebody's personal business. So it's a delicate balance. And we must be clear that we are small nations, nation limited with resources. I am sure the Attorney General would have wished that all these matters, he had enough resources to put people to deal with these matters that are there. And they are important. And the short point I want to make, the Team Unity government remains committed. And there is enough work that has been done in a consistent way to deal with these matters. And one of the important pieces of legislation, as we speak to the issue of corruption in the country and elsewhere, is the Procurement Act, held in abeyance before Team Unity, now operationalized, headed by the Financial Secretary. We didn't amend the Act, it was there, we just brought it into being because we recognize that putting the Act was part of the game that those before us were playing. So anybody say, do you have a Procurement Act? You get a tick, you have it. But are you using it? Up to yesterday, the AG advised me, he perhaps has a representative there, that there was a meeting of that body. So contracts of a certain magnitude, once it involved government money, it ought properly to come to the procurement board. That is part of the Act. You look at the sections, and the Financial Secretary, as the chair of that board, has a legal obligation to ensure that she tracks the government money, whether it is to a statutory body or otherwise, and to ensure that the procurement rules are being observed. Never in existence before. Does it solve all the problems? No, because there is no creature, there is no entity that you could devise that will stop bad people from breaking the laws. What you want are systems of control that once wrong is being done. They come to attention, and there are checks and controls to prevent reoccurrence and to bring those culpable to justice. And that is what we are committed to. And that is why we give support. Just this morning at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock, I was conferring with one of my ministers. And that minister was saying, we need to do this. I said, but we can't do it just now because we just come out of our budget. And I am not going to be able to sign an advance warrant unless at least it meets the test of having gone to the procurement board. That is the law. That is how we are attempting to do. And I'm not going to be asleep and bury my head and to say there are nothing about which we ought to be concerned. What I would say, we are developing the systems and allowing those systems to work in a way that ensure that our citizens and residents can achieve value for money from the work of the government, and we abide by best practices. So I'm encouraged to have that discussion. In fact, truth be told, just this week I said to the Attorney General, we need to have a frontal conversation about these issues of good governance. I am happy where we are at. I would be happier if we were further in the implementation. But I would say no government before us and no government in the region would have done more than we have done in relation to this in the short time frame in which we are there. And I haven't settled with the AG whether it would be on the Popular Leadership Matters or a press conference. I'm trying to find a vehicle that the AG cannot speak for too long in relation to this, because this is a topic about which I know that he's passionate and committed. So on that note, I want to invite my good friend and colleague, the Honorable Jean Hamilton, to address the issue raised, and to thank the media for bringing it to our attention, and to encourage them, though, to look at all those things that we have done in order to enhance the good governance agenda, which we believe in. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Batt, for the question. As I understand it, you question the criteria for the distribution of homes or allocation of homes. I got it right? It is interesting that that question should come on the heels of a most successful ceremony which was held last Friday. I think that was a ceremony when I pointed out to the public, and I will say it now, that it represents, and it represents still today, a microcosm of the demographics of our society. In St. Kitts and Nevis, we do have individuals who are Santo Domingans living here. We have Jamaicans, we have Guyanese, we have them all. And in that celebration, there was evidence of at least one person from Santo Domingo who now live here for some 20 or more years, from Jamaica, living here for quite some time, Guyana, living here for years, while they were also nationals of St. Kitts and Nevis. And in that ceremony, there were notable persons who represent the Labour Party, not PLP, not PAM, not CCM, but also the Labour Party. It shows the inclusiveness of the government of St. Kitts and Nevis in distributing the assets of St. Kitts and Nevis. But let me just add that there are over 6,000 or more persons out there with land allocated to them in different parts of the country. Many of them may have paid for their lands, some have not. When they do make applications to the National Housing Corporation for assistance, one of the things that we try to get them to do is to at least approach the bank and make sure that they are bankable. Maybe that's not the correct phraseology. that they can move the bank. In cases where that's not possible, the National Housing Corporation, if it can, will encourage those persons to put themselves in a position to qualify for such a home. What does that mean? They have to show, they should begin to save. There are many persons out there who want a home, but nobody beginning to put anything aside towards the home, so we encourage that. I like to call that exercising thrift, demonstrating that you can pay the National Housing Corporation for its home, for the home. So that is one of the things that we do. The board will then consider the application. Remember, there was a time when large tracts of land were available and NHC would be able to build 10, 12 homes on one plot of one area of land. Many of those are not available anymore because they are all separated across the country. So individuals would apply, and from the application process, a decision is made based on what needs there may be. So you will find that the decision to build a home on someone's land would have been made long before the stone is knocked. So when that house is given out, it's not a decision made at the time of distribution of the home, but a decision made because that person qualified first, they were not able to move the bank, and second, they are in need. There are also some times that we have to apply issues that have come from Ministry of Social Services, for example. And in St. Peter's, you have Parry, for example, where persons have received homes. They did not even apply, but their circumstances were so dire that we needed to rescue them from the indigent position in which they were. It is a government of compassion, of course, and that is why we do that. So basically, individuals apply. So if you don't apply, then they're not in position to be considered. If you apply, then you may be asked to qualify by getting loan from a bank to be assisted. And if you're not capable of doing that, then of course you move to the next phase where you may get assistance through funding from NHC if we have the funding. And remember, we're just coming out of a COVID situation where there was not much activity. So those 18, in fact 20 persons who got homes in St. Peter's the other day, whom I want to congratulate them for being selected, were selected based on the Board of Social Security meeting and evaluating all of the needs. In fact, 18 of the 20, because 2 of those were built on land belonging to those persons. But the other 18 were in 3 units. These units were unique. I believe that's why maybe it has attracted so much attention, that they were built 3 buildings made up of 6 units each. The units at the end of each building were of 3 bedrooms. One main bedroom was on the ground floor because we were saying from the start that individuals who would be chosen should be either large families or at least recognizing that individuals may be in those households with older folks who cannot climb stairs. That is why that bedroom was built on the main floor downstairs to accommodate that large family. So the criteria, if I'm to sum it up in a few words, you have to apply, you have to qualify, the board makes the decision, and in some cases, we may have to make decisions to support families that are in positions of indigence and need help otherwise. Thank you.
Good afternoon to everyone. On the question raised about the traffic lights and when we can expect those traffic lights to be commissioned, I said to you that on the 5th of March, we have a traffic engineer who arrives on island from out of Jamaica by the name of Mr. Cross. When he comes on island, the expectation is that the traffic lights will be commissioned. However, I want you to note that there is one exception. We are still navigating some issues relative to the traffic light at the junction of the Newtown Bay Road and Bird Rock. I am not certain if by the time he arrives, if we would have already successfully navigated the issues that we are experiencing there. Therefore, if we have not been able to do so, all of the other lights are expected to be turned on shortly after he arrives on island, with the exception of that particular traffic signal. To the second question, which was posed relative to potholes along the Old Road Bay Road, I indicate to you that that road isn't completed. While it is that the road has been opened for usage by the public, in terms of the road being officially handed over to the government, that process hasn't taken place. When government commissions a project, you have a process whereby at the end of it, you have the engineers from the Public Works Department, or if you have outside consultants, such as the case of the Old Road Bay Road, who would make that determination in terms of the completion of the road. When the work, the paving in particular, began at Old Road Bay, it was recognized by those responsible for doing the quality inspection of the roads, of the road, that indeed there are some issues with the quality of the road. Those quality issues have been pointed out to the contractor, and they are to be corrected. There are sections of the road which has to be re-asphalted, or I think there is some intention of using some sort of technology to correct the defects that persons would see in sections of the Old Road Bay Road. On the issue of drainage in the Taylor's area, unfortunately, I'm unable to respond to that particular question. I am not certain as to what the particular issue is, and more details would have to be provided for me to be able to provide a more fulsome answer, or to get the necessary information from the Roads Department. Thank you.
A pleasant good afternoon to all. Mr. Cornelius, in terms of the question regarding the Buckleys uprising and the monument, there was a committee that was established some time ago. The committee have been working to determine how best we can place a monument in recognition of the Buckleys uprising. In doing our research into the space, we learned that in the early 2000s, there were a number of historical sites that were designated as historical, so that those lands would remain with the National Historical Site Committee and with government. Unfortunately, the Buckleys estate was not designated in the early 2000s as a historical site. And therefore, in our research and investigations, we learned that the lands were actually sold. And so, where it is that we were trying to build a monument within that space, we later learned that that land was no longer in control by the government. And so, in order for us to be able to do that, we would have had to consider repurchasing the land, trying to move persons from where they are. We were in conversation with one of the mechanics that resides on the land. We also had discussions with sustainable development and trying to see whether or not we can move the mechanic, but it comes down to logistics. Would he be able to get a space that's adequate enough for his operation based on how it is now? And those discussions were not very easy, as there was not an area that was identified that he too was comfortable with. All that would have been taken into consideration. The other option that we looked at was the roundabout heading down towards Buckleys and placing the monument there. That is under the control of Social Security. However, there were some of the committee members who were not comfortable with that idea. They thought that the monument should be where the Buckleys uprising actually happened. And so, as the Prime Minister indicated, the report will be submitted for us to make a determination on how best to move forward in terms of the monument. Is it that we are going to try to see how we can get some of those lands back so that we can place the monument there, or are we going to use the roundabout that Social Security now have and place a monument there in terms of recognizing the Buckleys uprising? But whichever option we choose, as the Prime Minister indicated, we will be placing a monument in recognition of the Buckleys uprising. In terms of the digitization of health and health records, as I would have indicated in the budget address, we are in the process of getting our health information system up and running. The hope is that by this year we will be able to implement the health information system. Before we can actually put in the database, because then this would mean that everybody's records would be in a database accessible by computers, which means that the system must be accessible at all times. It must be able to be ready to use whenever the doctors or nurses need to enter information or retrieve information. That therefore means that the infrastructure must be in place to be able to support such a platform. Where we are right now is we have already submitted to the Ministry of Finance the approvals for us to be able to begin the infrastructural work that is necessary for us to be able to have the health information system up and running at JNF. How we are just awaiting those that approval. Once that approval is given, we will then be able to put the infrastructure in that would then allow us to be able to begin a phased approach in terms of getting the health information system up and running. And so we are hopeful that we will be able to have that done by the end of this year or even before. As you know, it would take time. It has to be a phased approach. So we have to make sure we test it in a live environment to make sure that the system is working as expected. And then we would have what we called a approach where we're using the paper-based as well as the system for some time, make sure that information is correct and the information collaborate before we roll over to the complete digital system. This system as well will be able to connect the primary health care as well and the health centers. And so in the next phase, we will then look at how we would then connect all of our community health centers back to JNF so that your information collected within community would be shared with JNF and vice versa. So all of that is in the works currently, and we are hopeful that the first part of it, which is on the JNF side of things, the institutional base, and not just JNF, but also Pogson and Mary Charles would have the health information system up and running this year. Thank you. Just one thing before I go to, we have just wanted to, first for general information, the Prime Minister stressed a lot on the importance of primary health care. And I just wanted to let the public know that the Ministry of Health is doing free health screening, monitoring, as well as free HIV testing today in the parking lot at Bladen's. And so we are asking persons to come and get your health screening done. We don't want you to end up in our institution. We would like you to be able to take care of your primary health early so that you can avoid getting there. So if you visit us at Bladen's, all day today, you'll be able to get free health screening and testing as well as free HIV testing. Valentine's Day is coming up, so I'm sure many of you would want to get what we've dubbed your lover's license. Make sure you have that negative HIV test, and so you can enjoy the Valentine weekend. Thank you.
Thanks. There was a matter raised which I will ask the CMO to address, and that was with respect to the restrictions. We just today announced restrictions vis-a-vis entertainment and sports. So the issue, and we are doing this in a phased way, as we have always said. that we will go in a phased way to get our country where it needs to be. We are also always mindful of the vulnerability of our health system. I want to make the point we cannot go sometimes as fast as larger countries, United Kingdom, Sweden. Some of them have abandoned the mask wearing, etc. And in time we will come to that. But we also always have to be mindful where we are at, what our system can withstand. This is one of the reasons why the World Health Organization says we are giving the general prescription and each country has to work it to take into account where they're at. If you ask, for example, how many beds we have in any ward of the hospital, it gives you an idea of what the sense of exposure we can invite as we open up. Because you have to plan the what-if scenarios. What if on the flight 30 persons come down with COVID and they're serious? Where are you going to put them? Which hospital? What will that do in terms of disrupting the way the hospital is being organized? So these are some of the practical considerations which impact upon how far we can move in the relaxation of some of the protocols we have put in place for the public safety. So I just want us to be conscious of that. But the issue then of mandates and all of these issues, Madam CMO, it may be a good time to hear your voice and those matters. But as we give you time, we have the Minister, Wendy Phipps, who will address those matters put in relation to the labor matters.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think if I recall correctly, there was just one main question on labor matters, and that would have been presented by Mr. Glenville Bart from My View News, if I am not mistaken. And the question was, if I recall correctly, that an update is being asked on the issue of persons who were terminated from their jobs for not taking the vaccine and have not received severance. Based on our records at the Ministry of Labor, we have no such case where an individual has been terminated on the basis of not taking the vaccine and has not been paid severance. That is the short answer. Having said that, I know that social media would have been rife over the course of several months relative to persons who it was believed would have been terminated for not taking the vaccine. The only company, our records indicate, where letters clearly stated that the terminations were COVID-related was the Rams group of companies, Rams Trading Limited. And in those cases, in particular, the workers at the Port Zante location, it was not a choice that they had, because in order to be open for business, to be travel certified, the staff, because it was considered a high-risk area, and we had accepted a certain amount of risk when it came to the admission of cruise ships with certain quantities of positive cases on board. In an issue like that, those individuals had been fully paid their severance. So again, we have no record on file at the Ministry of Labor where any individual would have been terminated on the basis of not taking the vaccine if it was COVID-related and they did not receive severance. However, I would hasten to add that in cases where persons would have been terminated without cause but were paid in lieu of notice, the law allows for that.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think the question spoke to or referred to countries that are, employing or going the route of relaxation of measures with respect to COVID-19, and when will we be engaged in a similar manner. What I would say is that given our high vaccination coverage rates. Let me just share those again. 76.9% of the adults in our population fully vaccinated, and 16.2% of the children aged 12 to 17 are fully vaccinated. When we look at the entire population, 55.5% of the total population fully vaccinated. So given our high vaccination coverage rates, and given our successes in terms of our containing the first three waves, and where we are at in terms of containing this fourth wave, we have already started in terms of relaxing measures with respect to COVID, and we will continue doing so. Our borders are now open, and that's air and sea. So in terms of our accepting inbound air travelers, we accept tourists, international travelers who are fully vaccinated, and even our own returning nationals. And once they meet the landing requirements, they are free to integrate in our society. So it's only those nationals who come in who are unvaccinated, they are asked to quarantine for 9 days. So our borders are quite open and porous in terms of air travel. In terms of sea travel, we accept cruise ship passengers. And so all cruise ships with a positivity rate less than or equal to 2%, they are granted free pratique. And the cruise passengers disembark, and they are allowed to integrate with our people. And just today, the Honorable Prime Minister, he would have announced that we would reduce restrictions on mass events and sporting activities as soon as Saturday, February the 12th. In terms of sporting activities, meaning the National COVID-19 Task Force, we've met with the SKNFA, that's the St. Kitts Nevis Football Association, and already approval was granted for the restart of football in terms of the grassroots, youth, and women's leagues. So in particular, I know for sure the Senior Women's League. And so yes, approval has already been granted for the restart of football. We've already, meaning the National COVID-19 Task Force, we've met with the Athletic Association, and approval granted for the under 12 athletics, sporting meets, etc. Just this past Tuesday, the task force engaged the St. Kitts Amateur Basketball Association, and we started discussion as to how basketball can resume. There was also a question that spoke to events and sporting activities, and if patrons vaccinated and unvaccinated would be allowed. I don't think we can give a blanket statement in terms of answering this question. What we can say is it depends on the event or the activity and the level of risk and the organizer of the event or activity. I think those would be the factors that would be determining if the patrons would be vaccinated or unvaccinated. And I think this would be announced ahead of the event. There was also another question in terms of plans to protect the health system and to prevent its becoming overwhelmed by COVID-19. That's a very good question. What I can say is that already we have contained 3 waves, and we are almost at the end of this 4th wave without our health system becoming overwhelmed. The government has injected quite a bit of funds in terms of strengthening our health system. We've procured the relevant personal protective equipment and gear. We've procured adequate medical equipment and supplies. We have engaged a team of case managers. They help us to manage all the positive cases, to help to maintain health, and to help those individuals recover with respect to their not progressing to severe disease. And so the case manager model that we utilize has helped us to reduce or to keep our hospitalization rate at its lowest, and also to keep the death rate where it's at. And so we will continue utilizing this model of using case managers. We will continue the public health interventions and measures that have worked so far. And within the Ministry of Health, we will continue doing our forecasting. These are all the measures that we have employed to help to prevent the overwhelming of the health system, and these we will continue. I left the hardest for last, and that's the whole issue of mandates, vaccine mandates. What I would say is that as a federation, we have done well in terms of the rollout of our COVID-19 vaccination program. It's almost 1 year, and we are third in line in terms of within the Eastern Caribbean and CARICOM in terms of the high level of vaccination coverage rates that we have achieved. We were one of the first in this region or in this sub-region to have more than 40% of our population fully vaccinated. And we've done so without vaccine mandates. And so vaccine mandates, it's very controversial. I don't think I would, go there right now. What I would say is I want to use this opportunity right here this morning to speak to those who are unvaccinated amongst us. The most recent deaths, meaning the most recent 11 COVID-19 related deaths that we've reported, they were all unvaccinated, they were all older adults, and they all had chronic underlying medical conditions. So what I want to focus on this morning is I think we all need to each one reach one in terms of if you know older adults who are unvaccinated, let's reach out to them and empower them with all the information that would be required to bring them on board so that they can give themselves that added layer of protection against COVID. So persons are saying Omicron is mild and you could easily fight it off. Yes, if you are younger and if you don't have any underlying medical conditions, but it's the older adults who we take the virus home to. They are the ones who end up in the hospital. They are the ones who end up very ill and dying. And so we want them to come on board in terms of accepting the vaccine and giving themselves that additional layer of protection against severe disease and death. And so that should be our focus within our various ministries, within our organizations, those who are unvaccinated, and help us plead and reach them. Each one reach one in terms of accepting the vaccine and keeping our death count at its lowest. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, in extension of the point I raised relative to severance, I just wanted to stress again, just because someone is terminated from their job doesn't automatically mean that they qualify for severance. I just want to be abundantly clear about that. And again, as I said earlier, someone can be terminated, receive without cause, and receive pay in lieu of notice. In a case like that, they are not eligible for severance. The grounds for severance are clearly articulated in Section 5 of the Protection of Employment Act.
Thank you very much. We have been here for quite a while. I want to thank all those who put questions. We had several media houses, and we have attempted to answer all of these. There was the question on the carnival closing ceremony, and we will try to get that information to you. The minister with responsibility for carnival is not here. But I want to thank all the cabinet colleagues for being here and also for being available to take questions on their department I want to thank the senior officials who have come and have added clarity to some of the issues and the public domain. I want to make one correction in my extemporizing regarding young people and work-related issues. I did say that my supervisor at Social Security, well, one of them was Ernest Amry, I'm told. It should be Stanley Amry, a short, bulky man from Birdwalk. So that is the one. Seflin Lawrence, the wife then of our financial secretary, Wendell Lawrence, and Miss Yearwood from Pickapay Alley. Those were the people who I met and who grounded me well at the Social Security scheme. I want to thank my colleague for reminding me to bring clarity to the Amrys. So thank you very much, one and all, for participating in this, our first press conference. From the large number of questions, it certainly has several issues, and we have addressed them. And I hope that the media would faithfully report the content of the press conference and, of course, our responses to the issues. If there are other issues, we certainly can take them on next Tuesday on Leadership Matters, and I'm sure Ms. Bryan and her team would be available to take questions via social media and via their phone soonest. So I bring this first press conference of the Office of the Prime Minister to a formal close and to thank all who have come out for their interest and for their participation. Thank you very much.
They had it, folks. The Prime Minister's monthly press conference here on Win FM 98.9. We're going to bring you the Win FM headline news.
You found the sound. 98.9. Win